This video demonstrates how to quickly set up a destruction scene that fractures the geometry, has debris particles, and contains dust from the pyro smoke simulation as part of the destruction visual effect, all done using Houdini's shelf tool. I did say a quick setup, however, I do go over some explanations on what the shelf tool creates automatically, which is most of the content of this video, just so that you're aware there's a lot of explanations ahead. Also, this is a two-part video where dust created by the pyro smoke simulation is part of the second video. A link is posted in the description. Okay, let's start with the geometry node. I'm gonna go inside and I'm gonna drop down test geometry. So just the rubber toy. Let's go back up. I'm gonna rename this to rubber toy. I'm going to fracture this rubber toy into pieces. So in the shelf tool over here, under model, there should be a shatter. There's a shatter tool here that you can use, and it will fracture your object for you. So let's click it. And down here on the 3D viewport right here, it says select objects for shatter. Press enter to accept selection. So once you move, the shelf tool relies heavily on the position of your mouse. So as you can see right now, my mouse is over the network panel, and the instructions on the 3D viewport immediately it's gone. But it's not always like that. So if you move it from here all the way here, it stays on, but for some reason if you move it, your mouse goes here to the model and then it goes to the network panel, it goes away. So it's a little finicky that way. But anyways, let's select the rubber toy, click it, and then while the 3D mouse cursor is hovering over the 3D viewport, so it's over here, press enter. And this will fracture our rubber toy for us. So as we can see here, I'm going to turn this into wireframe. There you go. So you can see the fractured points, fractured pieces. Now let's go back up. Okay, so I'm going to turn this rubber toy into a rigid body and have it create the rigid body, the RBD simulation for me using the shelf tool. So over here we have a rigid bodies tab. Click this, and we're going to be using the RBD glued objects because I want the glue constraints to be created for me as well. Now you can pre-select the rubber toy and then press this button. It will apply the RBD simulation, and it will turn this rubber toy, this fractured rubber toy, into an RBD object. Or once I click somewhere else, once I click an empty spot on the network panel, the selection goes away. Rubber toy selected, it's highlighted. All these lines come up, so you know that you have it selected. So once you have this selected, you can press this, or you can press it and then wait for the instructions down here. Select objects for RBD glued objects. Press enter to accept selection. I know it sounds a little weird. Select the rubber toy on the 3D panel, a 3D viewport. Click this. While the 3D cursor is still hovering over the 3D viewport, I know it's the position of the mouse is really important. Press enter. So it'll automatically create RBD objects inside. This is called an AutoDom Network, which is the same thing of doing this. It's a geo and then a geometry node and then putting a DOM net. It's just a DOM net in reality. This AutoDom Network is no different from this DOM net, except it skips a level. So once you double click it, it goes straight into the DOM net network. As opposed to here, I have a geometry node. You go in and then you have to go in again to get into the DOM net. This just goes, it's like right on flat on the object level, object context level. I'm going to rename this. I'm going to call it RBD Sim. Yeah. Once you get in here, Now this is pretty organized, but if you want to organize it even more automatically, just press L and it'll automatically organize the nodes for you as best as possible it could do. I usually like to put this on the side, put this up here. That's usually what I do. And let's take a look at the rubber toy. What has it done? So this was the shatter. Let me group it. This was done by the shatter, and then the rest of this was made by the RBD glued objects. Okay, let's see what it has done. Well, this is our constraints. So we're used to seeing this. We should be used to seeing this if you've seen my previous videos. It has created, because there's only 10 pieces, so there's very little pieces right now. So the connections, there's only like, I think, let's see how many connections. There are only 54 link connections. That is our glue constraints right now. So it has the glue constraint name, glue. So it has all the proper namings for the constraints and a little bit more. It has also packed the geometry for us as well. So if you see, take a look here in the rest. Before we have it packed, right here, it's 14,580 points. Let's lock it. After it's packed in this assemble node, as you can see over here, it is create pack geometry is selected. So let me take a look how many points it has. This has 24 points, indicating to me that it only has 24 pieces. Let's take a look. Now, during this name, so it has starts at piece 0 because it's 0 based. So I'll scroll all the way down. So it's piece 23. So there's 24 pieces. So it also packs the geometry for us, and also drops down a DOP import. So it has the whole thing set up for us. It even extracts. This is extracting the data from the RBD simulation over here, which is what they called the AutoDom Network. I've renamed it to RBD Sim. So it has everything all set up. Now this is what we would be rendering. I would put a null over here and name it out render to indicate that this would be the one that I would render. Now let's go to this RBD Sim. Now let's take a look. Let's try and play the simulation. Okay, all the pieces just keep falling down. That's because there's nothing to collide again. We need a ground plane. So okay, let's come back up here. In the shelf tool over here, there's a tab called collisions. So you can press this. Now there's a ground plane. This will add the ground plane to whatever you have selected, to whatever .NET network that you have selected down here. Oops, right beside the brain icon. Now it's easy right now because I only have one .NET in this whole scene. But later on, when we have multiple ones, this will come in handy. So it'll be asking us, where do we want to put the ground plane? Right now, we want it in this .NET. There's only one. So let's make sure that's checked. There's a check mark here. Press this ground plane. So it creates this node as well. This ground plane object, this dummy object to render. Now let's go inside the RBD Sim. And again, it's a little messy, so press L. And I like to do it this way. So this might look very familiar if you've seen my previous videos. Let's play the animation. Now he's not doing anything because the rubber toy is sitting flat in the middle of the ground plane. So let's move the rubber toy a little higher. Okay, let's drop down transform. Move them up by 2 meters. Okay, now let's go back to the RBD Sim and drop them down. I'll play the animation. I'll play the simulation. Okay, so some of it breaks. Cool, everything's working. Let's go back up. Now, turn off the wireframe on. On impact, I want there to be smaller pieces, like debris, to sort of break off from these larger chunky pieces. So there's something in, if we go to the rigid bodies tab in the shell tool again, there's something here called debris. If we can find it right here, this guy. This will generate particles, debris particles that break off on impact. So let's deselect everything, click somewhere empty like this here, and deselect it and press this debris icon. Select the primitives from which to create debris and press enter to complete. Where do we want the debris to come from? Well, the rubber toy, obviously, so this guy. So let's click this rubber toy and then press enter. Okay, let's see what it has done. Go all the way back up. Let me organize this a bit. Debris, let me group this. So this is our RB. This is our debris. Let's take a look at the rubber toy. Let's see what it has done to the rubber toy. Okay, nothing. It hasn't added anything here. Let's go back up. Let's go to the debris source. Over here. Now, as you can see, this rubber toy is using my out render. The debris source is importing my rubber toy, the fractured rubber toy. That is this guy. So this is the result of the whole RBD simulation. It's after the DOP import. So it's the result of everything. After that, it doesn't unpack. That's because this fractured rubber toy, the DOP import, the result of the RBD sim, it's still packed geometry. If we go back, let's go back here. This DOP import, it is fetching geometry from DOP network. It's not unpack geometry from DOP network. So it's not unpacking it for us. We are fetching the geometry from the DOP network as a raw data. Whatever it was reading, it is coming back out after the simulation. So we have to unpack the data. So let's take a look here. This object has 24 points. Now, after we unpack it, we have 14,582 points. So it's a lot more points. Afterwards, it added a remove attribute. It renamed attributes, which is, it's trying to delete. It allows you to delete data from the geometry spreadsheet. So this is more likely a cleanup step. But if we look here, there's nothing being deleted. But if you look into the primitives, you'll see that delete attributes. It's deleting everything but the name. So that's what this hat symbol is. It says delete everything but this name. Let's go over to the geometry spreadsheet here. Press the primitives icon. This name is still here. Now let's see what it looked like before the remove attributes. There was a shop material attribute. So it just got rid of that. It kept the groups and everything. So this is just deleting attributes. It's not deleting groups. And it kept the name because it says delete everything but the name. Now the trail, this is computing the velocity between the current frame and the previous frame. And it calculates a velocity between those two. If we look here, let's turn this back to the points, and we have a velocity attribute here. If we go up here, we never had a velocity here. So this is adding the velocity. But the velocity is 0. Only for the first frame, because this rubber toy isn't moving yet. So let's move it. Let's go to the next frame. Now we're starting to have velocity. We're on frame 2. We have velocity going down. So everything's going down. And there's some anomaly over here in the X. So we go here on the 3rd frame. They're starting to get a lot of these values here. Now this number is really small. You can actually ignore it. It's 4.47035 e to the negative 0.8, which e is, it means times 10 to the exponent of 8. Negative 8. That means it's 0.0000. Like, there should be 7 trailing zeros before you have a 4, because the 4 is 4 point. Anyways, it's a very small number. You can just ignore this. It's actually going down. You won't start to see really an actual velocity until an impact. So let's take a look. Okay, so it's starting to impact here. So you're starting to see really more interesting velocities. There you go. So we're getting more interesting velocities. That's what this node is doing. It's keeping track of the velocity per frame. Next, we have a debris source. So there's something I need to show you first. Let's put the render flag here. Let's go back and let's take a look at the simulation, the debris simulation. Just gonna organize this a bit. Okay, I think that's a bit better. I'm just gonna connect it to the out as well. Bit better. Let's go back up, reset the simulation and play it again. Now, okay, there's a few things wrong about this. One, it's falling through the ground plane. That's because this pop simulation, our debris simulation, doesn't have a ground plane to collide with. But we'll get to that in just a second. What I wanted to point out is that the debris doesn't start to happen until it cracks, until there's on impact. So frame 15, it's not impact. It hasn't collided with the ground plane yet. So the next frame, frame 16, it's starting to crack because there's impact onto the ground. It's colliding with the ground. And we see that points are being generated. These blue points are the emitter points for this pop simulation, for the debris simulation. They're emitter points. So the POPNET, which is our debris_sim node, aka particle simulation, is generating a bunch of particles, which we will render them as debris. But what the POPNET needs to know is where to generate the particles. We need emission points, or you can call them source points. These emission points are potentially location areas that the POPNET will give birth to our debris particles. The emission points or source points do not get rendered. We don't need to render that because that's just used to kickstart the POPNET simulation. Without emission points, the POPNET doesn't do anything. It doesn't generate debris particles because there are no birth areas. In the debris here, debris source, this debris source node is detecting when our fractured object is hitting the ground. That's when it starts generating emission points. Now, without emission points, this DOM network will not generate, it won't generate particles at all. Without emission points, this POP network, this debris sim will not generate particles. So without the particles, we won't see the damage. We won't see little pieces of damage. That's what we're trying to aim at. That's what we're trying to achieve in our debris sim. The smart thing about this debris tool is that it's smart enough to know that we don't want debris on frame 15. We don't want debris on frame 14 or any frames before 16. Before impact, we don't want any debris. We only want debris after the impact. So this tool is smart enough to know that. And that's what this debris source node is doing. If we go in here, this node is grayed out, so we can't change anything to it. But if you come up here, right click the node and go to allow editing of contents, then we can start changing stuff into this node and press L to organize it a bit. That didn't help much. Let me manually do this. Organizing the nodes is quite important when you're trying to read what's going on, because it's sort of like organizing code. It makes it more readable. I'm just gonna briefly go about the core concept of what this is doing, how it detects the impact. For anything like that you want more detail on, I'm probably gonna post that on my blog. So most of this over here, all these nodes over here, are trying to determine where to put the emission points. So let's turn on points so we can actually see it. Right now there's nothing. Put the render flag over here. There's actually points. So when I put it over here, there's points. This is determining, this part of the debris source node is trying to determine where can I put the emission points. Well, we have our geometry here, and what this is doing, it's trying to find the edges of each fractured piece. So because we fractured the rubber toy, it has internal edges as well. Let's convert to curves. Okay, so up here, it's still the promote name. It still has our rubber toy geometry, and it's fractured. I just wanted to show you this. Exploded view. So this is still being fractured. So this is our fractured rubber toy. It's still fractured. Now let's go to convert curves. So it took our rubber toy geometry and it converted it all to curves. So we can have it's like staring at the wireframe. Now I'm gonna hook this up to the exploded view. It basically took that geometry and it made curves out of it. That's what this does. Okay, and then scatter edge. So it's scattering points all over those curves, all over that wireframe. This one, and it has another scatter surface. So this scatters points all over the surface. However, this how many points to scatter all over the surface? It's 0. This parameter is linked to the one on the top here, surface debris here. So if we put 10 and go back, go back here. This is now 10. So it's linked to the top. How many pieces do you want scattered at the top? Well, I'm just going to keep it at 0 right now. And it's merging both the scattered points together to have a lot of scattered points. So these will be potential areas to add debris emission points. So up until now, this is just to figure out where to put the debris emission points. Next, I'm just going to briefly go over this. I'm not going to go over this line by line. This is basically trying to find each point in another nearby point from a different piece. So we have the rubber toy is fractured into multiple pieces. This attribute wrangle runs through all the points and it tries to find another point that's close enough, but it's not from the same piece. Because obviously one piece has a lot of points on it, and chances are a nearby point will be coming from the same piece because it's so close. That's a higher chance. But we don't want, that's not very useful. If I find one point and I find another point, but it's from the same piece, that's not helping me. What this is doing is taking every single point and it's finding another point from another piece. And it's using the name of the piece. So it compares the name. As long as you have a different name, which is this name here, this name attribute over here. As long as you have a different name. And once it has that different name, it records it down. Okay, I'm going to remember you as the other ID. After it gets all that information, it comes here, and we have another attribute wrangle node. And what it's doing, it's declaring the age and release. Age will be how long has this point existed after impact. Release is this point has been impacted and it's flying off. Because remember, we have glue constraints. So some of the pieces are going to fly off. Some of the pieces are going to stick together. So that's why we need a released attribute to indicate if this point is a piece flying off. Next, the SOP solver. Now, this is where it figures out the impact. The SOP solver is a special node. It has access to the previous frame information from the previous frame. So what it does, it's comparing the distance between the current point and its other friend of the other ID, that it was the nearby point, and it compares the distance between the two. If it is greater than a certain distance, it considers it on impact, which makes sense because when the rubber toy collides with the ground, the pieces start flying away, apart from each other. So there's distance between the pieces. And that's what this is relying on. The distance between that in order to detect if the rubber toy is on impact. So that's how this is detecting the impact. This is just coloring it. If this point has been in impact for so long, I want it to be white. And if it has been on impact for a longer time, slowly turn dark. So let's put this back here and go back up and just try running it. So you can see these pieces, they're turning as the time goes on, it's turning darker. So right on impact, it's bright white, and it slowly gets darker. you can start to sort of make out the fractured piece, because emission points that it's trying to calculate is trying to calculate potential emission areas where it can release debris pieces. It's outlining the fractured piece, so you can sort of make it out. Let me put the rubber tour back in. Okay, so you can see highlight, so you can sort of see points here we go, so where the potential emission points are, right at the edges of each fractured piece. We can actually change the color of the points as well. So I'm gonna come here, I'm gonna change this to red so you can see it a little bit better. There you go. So as it ages, it'll turn red. This is white because this is upon impact, and moving forward, it ages and ages and ages and disappears because it's just outlived the lifespan, which we can control the lifespan over here. Press debris, lifespan here. Create a longer lifespan for each emission point. Remember, this is just emission point. It's not the actual debris points. The actual debris points come from the simulation network, which is a POPNET. So this is our POPNET. This is our particle simulation. I'm going to reset the simulation, play it again. Now it's indicating the emission points in blue, and these other particles are being born inside the simulation. Now let's fix one thing. It's going right through the ground. So that's because this POPNET does not have a ground plane. So let's go back up. Now we know how to add a ground plane. We go to this collisions tab and we click this ground plane. However, this time we have three solvers. We have the RBD sim, the debris sim, and this one is the SOP solver. That's the SOP solver in here. That's this SOP solver. So let's go back up. Now, which one do we want to add the ground plane for? Well, we need it for the POPNET. So that's this. That's our debris sim. So check this. Make sure this is checked. Then come up here to collisions and click ground plane. Okay, it adds a ground plane. Let's put this here. Let's go back to the debris sim. Now this is messy, so press L. Press L. Now it added a ground plane here. So this is what it is. So it added a ground plane. Now let's rewind this simulation. Play it again. Okay. Okay, now these points, see these white points? They're colliding with the ground. See, nothing's falling through the ground. So that's perfect. Go back up. Now I'm going to start, before I add the smoke, so I want dust to come out of this as well. So we're going to touch on the pyro simulation with the shelf tool. But before that, I want to do a quick render. So I need to set up the redshift material. Well, first let's set up a camera. Okay, I think this angle's let's go to the out. Let's set up a redshift. Here. I'm just going to turn off progressive rendering because I want it to render faster. The out, I'm going to turn off the mplay. Go back to okay, let's just render it then. Oh, I forgot lights. Redshift tab here. I'm gonna add a dome light. Very quick dome light. However, we don't see our debris particles. Where's our debris particles? Like that's these little these particles here. Oh, well, that's not rendering here. That's because now this is the debris particles. Okay, let's rename this debris particles. This debris particles, okay, for one thing, we're missing the redshift tab here. So for every single node like this, we have a redshift object tab. That's because this node was created by a shelf tool. So we need to add it. And that's very easy. Let's go to the redshift shelf tool here. There's an object params button here. Press this okay, select this debris particles node first. That's missing the redshift tab. Select this first and then come here and press this button and they'll add it right here. We have the redshift object tab here. Come here to the redshift object tab, go to particles, render object as particles. Check this. Since sometimes when you add new geometry, you have to press this render button to force it to update. So our particles are showing now. Well, and another thing, it's rendering, you see these other particles, these spots over here, that's actually the grid. So if I come up here, let's select this and press the points button. It's rendering these. Okay, let me make it a bit bigger. Point marker 9. Okay. It's rendering these points, the points on the grid. That's because, let's go in here. This dot import, it's importing everything. But I just want to import the particles from the POPNET. It's importing the ground plane as well. I don't want that. But come here and, okay, actually I should show you this first. Click the POPNET. Come over here to the geometry spreadsheet. We have a pop object here. Expand it, and you'll see that sorry, you don't need to expand it. This is the object that we want to extract, not this. But since this DOP import has an asterisk, it's pulling in everything. But we only want this pop object. So let's go back here. Let's filter it. Let's just type pop, and the asterisk will match everything. So now we only have the particles from the pop network. So let's go back to the render. Okay, that got rid of all those annoying, the ridiculous dots on the grid. However, these particles are way too big. So select our debris particles node. And for the particles tab, let's global scale multiplier. Let's make this a lot smaller. Okay, that's way too small. I think that's okay for now. Let's see what 0.2 does for us for now. Please check out the next video demonstrating how to set up the dust from the destruction using the pyro smoke shelf tool in Houdini. The next video will reuse this HIP file and continue directly from this video. Link in the description.